Good morning and welcome to another edition of Mornings with Matthew. I'm your host, Matthew Tragesser, and joining me today is Farr's Preston Huennekens from our Government Relations Department. As you guys can see, we're doing a visual element now with the podcast, and we're hoping to do this probably once a week. And we thought it would be more interesting for our listeners to see kind of our studio and I guess what we look like in person. So today we'll be discussing and reacting to the 2020 Democratic presidential debates that occurred recently. Obviously, there's a lot to take away, but we want to focus mainly on immigration because that's what we work with every day. So the first aspect of this debate I want to talk about is the decriminalization of illegal entry and proper entry that a lot of the candidates on the first night talked about. So let's play a clip of this and we'll react to it after it.
Spirited debate on this stage last night on the topic of decriminalization of the border. If you'd be so kind, raise your hand if you think it should be a civil offense rather than a crime to cross the border without documentation. Can we keep the hands up so we could see them?
And let's remember, that's not just a theoretical exercise. That criminalization, that is the basis for family separation.
So Preston, do you think after seeing this clip, is decriminalizing improper entry, illegal entry, going to help or hurt our current border crisis?
It would certainly almost entirely hurt it. That's a wild proposal. And it's kind of crazy that they've even brought this up. This isn't something that any Democratic candidate brought up before. I think it was Julian Castro in his immigration plan kind of rolled that out as the key part of it. Mm-hmm. And so now everyone's kind of jumped on that and it's become almost the standard line for these Democratic candidates. I mean, that's a horrible idea. That we already have so many incentives, with our broken asylum system, the fact that we're not really deporting a lot, there's really no effort to deport people from the interior.
Yeah, it's very difficult.
So we already have all these incentives. Why on earth would you just add to that by not criminalizing illegal entry?
In fact, former Obama DHS Secretary Jay Johnson came out this morning saying, look, if you decriminalize these illegal entries, it's essentially open borders, which I thought was very interesting because here, he served not even a decade ago, and he's, calling out his fellow members of the party. I mean, it goes to show you how far left the Democratic Party has shifted on the immigration issue. I mean, if you recall, not even 10 years ago, you had Democratic candidates and politicians, congressional members voting for, the Secure Fence Act of 2006, which, provided fencing on the southern border, and just, they had a more moderate stance on that, and now it's the complete reversal. They want to decriminalize coming to this country, and I just think that this can only give more fuel to Trump when he runs for 2020. I mean, don't you think that he's going to just have a field day with this?
Yeah, and I think this is actually a very bad political stance for these candidates to be taking. Obviously, during the primary season, they have to run almost as far to the left as possible to appease the base, to stand out in a crowd of 20 candidates. But once the eventual winner has to face Trump, they're going to have to answer for why they supported that. And then by comparison, Trump will look almost sane by saying, hey, this is a wild proposal. Under my administration, we would not do this. This flies in the face of 15 years of immigration enforcement. So I think that's, it's on one, they're kind of stuck because they have to, jump onto these wild proposals. But on the other hand, it's going to be very difficult for them to look moderate in the general.
And, our southern border has seen over 100,000 apprehensions for the last 3 months. These are levels we haven't seen since 2006. I mean, it's really unprecedented. And, a lot of these Democrats and, anyone in this country is concerned about the conditions at the southern border. We're at full capacity. And so don't you think, though, this is just going to add more problems to this crisis because it's going to act as an incentive? You're going to have more people coming to the borders. There's no detention space left. Shortages of everything across the board. And if Democrats truly cared about migrants and their well-being, let's say, they wouldn't be adding an incentive like this for them to continue to come at our border at record rates.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, in a perfect world, what we would want is to, increase the the funding and the care that we have at the facilities for the people there, while at the same time preventing anyone else from coming.
Right.
You want to take care of the people that have made it here, and we attempted to do that with this border, with this supplemental emergency funding. But
$4.6 billion, right?
Yeah, but if you're talking about decriminalizing illegal entry, that efforts like that are going to be completely moot, because there's going to be so many people presenting themselves at the border. It'll make what we have now look like nothing.
Yeah, it is just not a good solution at the moment. I just can't see where they're coming from. But another aspect I wanted to talk about during these debates was on the second night, and these Democratic presidential candidates, they brought up another incentive for illegal aliens to come to our country. And this was when all 10 candidates on the second night voted to essentially give government subsidized healthcare to illegal aliens in the country. Let's take a look at that clip from the debates.
Raise your hand if your government plan would provide coverage for undocumented immigrants.
So, Preston, I mean, offering government subsidized healthcare to illegal aliens in the country is obviously something that we haven't really seen before. And the fact that I think all these candidates essentially said, yep, we're in favor of this. What are your initial thoughts on that?
Yeah, again, I think this is similar almost to the question about, decriminalizing illegal entry. I think this, once again, you have to be on board with this as a Democratic candidate if you're trying to appease the base, if you're trying to stand out in a crowded primary field. But once again, what is this going to look like in the general? Do Americans really think that's a great use of our, Medicare and Medicaid funding? I don't think so. I think,
or even taxpayer funding.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing, is that I think a lot of people are going to look around and say, wait a minute, our resources are already strained as they are. Why on earth would we even consider extending these benefits to people who have no legal right to be in the United States?
Right. And I just read a report recently where there's a growing concern of a shortage of doctors nationwide. And, to add, right now, we estimate that there's 12.5 million illegal aliens currently in our country. It probably is even higher. I mean, it's hard to calculate really the total number, but, if you introduce this whole new population to our existing, medical programs, to our doctors, I mean, it's just going to be overstrained. And I just don't see how it's going to be a sustainable system after that.
Right. And I mean, our medical system to an extent is already overstrained, particularly with, publicly funded, healthcare access. So this is, again, just, I think, a political proposal that these candidates think they have to sign on to in order to win the primary. I think it's going to come back and bite them in the general. Because again, I don't think that there's a huge majority of Americans out there that think this is a wise allocation of funds.
Not at all. And we have 500,000 people currently with just living on the streets in complete just impoverished conditions.
Or even look at the veterans in VA.
Veterans,
that's a system that's completely collapsing.
Low-income families, that are law-abiding citizens or even lawful immigrants too. There's a huge pool of people who could be using or needing better medical care, and they're just not getting it. And then Democrats are proposing spending billions and billions on people who have no legal right to remain in the country. It's beyond me. I don't understand. But I guess this is something that this party is going to be running on as we head into the 2020 presidential elections. Now, going off of those two kind of incentives, there was one aspect of the 2020 debates, and I'm sure you saw this, where on the first night, 3 presidential candidates also spoke in Spanish. And it wasn't for a long time. It was, a couple of sentences, but this was unprecedented. You don't see this in any debates. And the fact that you had 3 candidates speak up there was something, totally different.
La situación ahora es inaceptable. El presidente ha atacado, ha demonizado los inmigrantes. Es inaceptable y voy a cambiar este.
Congresista O'Rourke, ¿qué haría usted en el primer día si usted es presidente sobre esta realidad que está ocurriendo? What would you do, Congressman, day one at the White House?
Vamos a tratar cada persona con el respeto y dignidad que merecen como humanos.
Me llamo Julián Castro y estoy postulando por presidente de los Estados Unidos.
I'm not saying that's bad by any means, but what are your initial thoughts on that? Do you think it's pandering a little bit to the Hispanic Latino community, or do you think, hey, it's symbolic, it shows that, we're with that group?
Yeah, no, initially, I have no issue with a presidential candidate speaking Spanish. That's not particularly a huge deal to me. I do think that, for instance, I think Beto that's completely pandering.
Yeah.
So to an extent, it definitely is. And that's something that just, people hate about politics to begin with, is how candidates will, kind of shift their, depending on the audience they're trying to talk to. And I think that's what it is, really.
Right.
But there's nothing, I don't think, inherently bad with a candidate speaking Spanish, but it's definitely pandering. And,
Yeah, no, I mean,
I don't know. That's kind of where it comes down to for me.
The three candidates were Julian Castro, Beto, and Cory Booker, of all people. So definitely something, it's new. But, as someone who's a Guatemalan American, part of the Hispanic Latino community, I personally thought it was a little bit of a pandering move. As someone, who sees and who has family members, who has friends in this community, I think a lot of them would want to see actual concrete policy positions that they're taking to help this community, rather than, attempting to speak a couple broken sentences in Spanish. And going forward, I don't know if they'll continue to speak in Spanish at these debates, but I mean, you ask them, how are you going to solve our immigration crisis? And they say comprehensive immigration reform. And it really stays at that. There's a lot of ambiguity as to what they want to do and how they're going to really improve, conditions and wages and, just overall, I guess, lifestyles for the Hispanic and Latino community in the United States.
Yeah, and something that we, need to keep in mind at all times too is that, if you're talking about helping, the lower class of Americans, which includes, first generation immigrants, if you look at who illegal immigration hurts the most, it's that group of people.
Yeah.
So, to have a Democratic candidate who comes up, says that they want to, amnesty all these people, and they'll speak a little bit of Spanish to try to get people to vote for them. In the short term, it's, it's a political move, but I mean, the long-term ramifications of what they're actually selling these groups is very bad for them. And, what would you rather have, a candidate that is speaking Spanish, or a candidate who's going to tell you the truth about, the effect that, unskilled, uneducated, illegal aliens, how that population hurts our, maybe lesser educated and unskilled Americans who are competing for the same jobs.
And a lot of these candidates too, the presidential candidates running for the Democratic Party, they want to abolish ICE, but they don't understand that, ICE actually targets illegal aliens, often with criminal ties or, criminal convictions that are in these Latino Hispanic communities. And essentially these criminals are actually almost preying on people that are from their own communities, because it's, I guess they're all in the surrounding areas together, but it's abolishing ICE would not help the Hispanic Latino community, I guess, stay safe from, the MS-13 and,
right.
and these gangs.
And it's always important to remember too, MS-13 isn't shaking down, suburban, neighborhood businesses. They're shaking down the immigrant community businesses that, where they're living. And, another important thing about ICE too is, who's going to do that job? People say, oh, we're going to abolish ICE and then replace it with something better. Yeah. It's like, well, it's always, we'll abolish ICE and then discuss enforcement. But there's, of course, no one's seriously talking about that.
Yeah. So I think there's been a big misunderstanding with ICE and its role. And they do help the Hispanic Latino community because they remove those criminals that are preying on, members in their community to recruit them for MS-13, for other criminal activities. So I think that's something that's completely overlooked by these candidates. And, hopefully they kind of stray away from the abolish ICE movement.
I would encourage them to look at ICE's Q2 data for removals.
Yeah.
It was, I forget the exact category, but I think they said it was like 91% of interior removals were done of people who had either pending criminal charges or had criminal convictions. So they're not going into random houses and dragging out, otherwise law-abiding, illegal aliens.
Yeah,
they're going for people who are committing crimes, who are terrorizing the communities that they're living in.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's plenty of more to talk about, but unfortunately, that's all the time we have today. I hope you guys enjoyed our visual component of the podcast. Preston and I will be doing this hopefully weekly. We're still uploading this to SoundCloud, so if you want to check us out there, we'll have the audio portion on SoundCloud, like I said, and it's fair.federation. And for more immigration-related news and content, please check us out on our website at fairus.org. Thanks again, guys. We'll see you next week for another edition of Mornings with Matthew.